What's going on, everybody? This is Afro Think Tank. All right, I've been getting this question over and over and over again by FBA in my comment section, and I've been seeing every single FBA content creator lie on their live streams and YouTube videos. Every single one of them literally don't know what they're talking about when it comes to this. While Ghana, the president of Ghana, was in New York. Like, when I say the criminal ignorance, I mean, we're talking about diabolical criminal ignorance, all right? So what I'm going to do is explain to you why, all right, the Ghanaian president was in New York, all right, advocating for reparations, all right, to debunk all the FBA content creators who literally don't know what they're talking about at all, right? And because of that, they're spreading misinformation to all the non-content creator FBAs who now think that Ghana's trying to steal African Americans. That is the stupid. Oh God! But it's okay for regular people who call themselves FBA as not content creators not to know this. This is not general public information. This is not something you would generally know unless you're new, unless you're really into international business, okay? But there's no excuse for the content creators who are speaking on stuff they know nothing about, all right? Pretending like they're experts, pretending like they know anything about anything. They'll speak for hours upon hours upon hours and make videos upon videos, complaining and yelling and just distributing the stupidest, most dangerous information, making you guys believe that what's happening is not happening and making you think that something that's not happening is happening. All right, so let me break it down to you what's happening. Okay. The president right now of Ghana is currently the president of the African Union. Okay? It's a rotating presidency. The African Union has a 2060 or 2064 plan or whatever. It's like, you know how you have Project 2025 for white racists? Well, there's a Project 2060 or 2064 plan for African heads of state. All right. Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to say the African Union was formed by the European Union. Some people who know a little something. Now, the African Union, right, is the union of African states, all the African states. Just like you got a state government, right? You recognize you have your state government, right, where you have you guys formed just like the federal government. You got your House, your Senate, right, and then you got your governor, right? Your governor is like the president of your state, right? That's what you gotta understand. Your governor is like the president of your state, right? Then you got the federal government, which we have the actual president, which is somehow Donald Trump, right? And then you got the Democrats and Republicans on the federal level. All the senators, the House, you know, they have those people represent districts within the state, right? And then you got the Senate, which those guys represent the state, right? And then they come together and they legislate, and then they pass along to the president, right? But then you got the bigger governing bodies, which really nobody pays attention to, right? You got the African Union, right? That's in Africa. Then you got the European Union. That's in Europe, right? Then the European Union is a governing body of all the European states, all right? They have a head of the European Union. That's like the president of the European Union, like the president of all the European states, right? And in Africa, you have the African Union, right? And you have the president of the African Union, the president of all the African states meaning countries, right? And so even though the European Union was set up, the African Union was set up with help from the European Union. At first, it was set up to control African states, right? Because that's what the whole survival technique is, to leech off Africa. Now, the African Union is not as strong as the European Union, because the African Union is still, each country in the African Union are still dealing with neo-colonization, all right? But the African Union is getting stronger because it represents all the African countries, right? It's the Union of African Countries. It's a Pan-African organization. Now, within the African Union, you have the Pan-African Parliament. It's a specific portion of the African Union that deals with Pan-African issues, meaning it concentrates on connecting Africa with the African states with each other and connecting the diaspora with the African continent. This is what they do. The Pan-African Parliament. It's a legitimate governmental entity that consists of 6 regions. All right. Now, the African Americans, Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos are the 6th region of the African Union. You have the 1st region, right? You have the 2nd region, 3rd, 4th, 5th, then 6th, right? That represents North Africa, Southern Africa, West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, and then the African diaspora, all right? The African diaspora, like I said, which consists of all Africans taken into the transatlantic slave trade and are now currently in the Western Hemisphere, all right? Now, because it's a governing body, obviously, you know, the different countries have different political views. Some of them got dictators, some got puppet governments. Like, it's very messy. But they're currently trying to fix all of that, which takes time. Just like if you notice, the politicians in America, you've been seeing them for the last 30 years, right? So that means for the last 30 years, America and the policies have been being legislated by the same old fuckers, all right, for 30 years, because we, the American people, keep voting them back in. And we don't vote for new people because we don't pay attention to politics. If you pay attention to politics, you can control who's in the goddamn seat of power, all right? Same thing goes for Africa. All right, well, for some countries, the president is just stealing the shit, right? Right? Some countries don't subscribe to the same democracy that we have. Now, in order to seek reparations, I keep telling you, Pan-Africans have always been trying to get reparations. We are the only group trying to get reparations. Now, the 6th region is represented, right, by various organizations in the Western Hemisphere. The AAC, what's the goddamn, the Black Caucus, right? The NAACP, right? And various other Pan-African, pro-Black, large corporate funded organizations that represent African Americans. We have our representatives that sits in the House of the Pan-African Parliament. They come together, right, every now and then to legislate and to talk about what their agenda is. Now, the agenda is to make a African, the ultimate goal at the end of the day, decades down the line, is to make a United States of Africa, right? Very difficult, but that's the goal, right? So they have pieces of legislation, right, that they're implementing over time in order to make that happen. That's why if you've been paying attention at all, you would notice that there are a lot of governments starting to lift visa requirements. There are a lot of governments that's breaking down the European legislated laws that keep Africans from doing business with each other. There are a lot of legislations being passed within the African Union that's meant to get rid of the lines created by the Europeans. You understand? So that commerce can flow evenly throughout Africa. If you have not noticed, a lot of these countries have been nationalizing their resources, right? And they've been taking back control of their oil. They've been taking control of their gold. They've been forming banks. They've been saving and processing their raw material, right? And then putting it in the bank, right? Their own bank, not the International Monetary Fund, right? They've been putting it in their own banks so that they can have reserve currencies, so they can borrow money from themselves and not borrow money from the West. That's key. If you got to continue to borrow money from the West, that means that you're susceptible to the things they want you to, be susceptible to in order to get those loans, right? That's what keeps Africa down, is bit by bit by bit by bit. They're trying to open up Africa so their economies can flow between each other. Right. Now, African Americans are 6 regions. We are represented We are a part of it, right? Us, all Caribbeans, African Americans, we're all a part of it. Now, the difficult thing about doing stuff on such a large scale is that every time the African Union, right, via the Pan-African Parliament, passes anything that's dealing with legislation between two states, those guys have to go back to their states/countries and they have to legislate on the federal level, right, to agree upon the deals that was hashed out at that higher level, right? That can take time because you still have puppets in every level of government, all right? So and people still have interests, and you still have local politics that have to be taking place, and you still have consequences for development, right? There are consequences for development. Now, within Africa, there are other organizations. You have the East African Federation, right? The East African Federation is another economic bloc that's currently being developed over there in East Africa, connecting East African economies, right? I.e. Uganda, Kenya, and, and I think, and a few other ones, but Uganda and Kenya are leading the way over that side, right? Then you have ECOWAS. ECOWAS was developed on the West Africa to create ECOWAS, a economic bloc. Everything happens in steps, right? So ECOWAS, which is still, which was also, all this shit was always coerced and created, by Europeans, because they keep trying to keep their fingers in shit so they can get, white people. They always got to keep trying to get up in shit so they can try to siphon. Their job is to be parasites. They're going to be parasites, but nonetheless, as they are trying to be parasitic, Africa's trying to, they're trying to get rid of them. They're trying to do their thing anyway. They still need the shits to be formed, right? So you got ECOWAS, which seems to still be a puppet because the leader of, if you notice, the biggest ECOWAS company is Nigeria, and we all know, Nigeria is too big to do what the AES has done, right? Then you got the AES, right? The newly formed bloc, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, right? Because of their where they are economically, they united with each other to form an economic bloc, somewhat of a federation, somewhat of a single country. Because as small as they were, right, as far as their population and numbers and like their living area, they were too small economically to be able to fight back from larger forces like the United Nations and France itself, because France is the ultimate parasite, right? So they're doing things differently from ECOWAS, right? They have a more aggressive militaristic stance, of progressing past being a part of the Francophone block of countries, because France literally we're running their currency through their banks first. So, which was absolutely nuts, right? So they're in the process of detaching themselves from neocolonialism in the way they have to do it. Nigeria itself, like I keep telling you, Nigeria is really 30-something different countries. 30, right? So when you think about tribalism, stuff like that, what you really need to be thinking about is 30 different countries trying to figure out how they're going to work together, despite their historical differences, which they are currently doing right now. And also they have to do that while also coordinating with other countries around them that's dealing with similar things, because a lot of these countries were formed by white people, right? That doesn't mean that those countries were there before white people drew lines, right? A lot of these people are related on both sides of the border. They're the same tribe. They're the same group of people, right? So then you have to coordinate and deal with that shit, right? On top of that, they have to figure out how to incorporate the diaspora and deal with, what the historical wrongs done in the past. Now, a lot of FBA says they sold us. What you need to understand is we didn't just sell our own people into the transatlantic slave trade. That's simple-minded thinking. That's not what happened. These were different nations of people at war. Different nations of people fighting each other for various different reasons. The same way Japan, that small little island, had different clans fighting each other, right? They got, y'all know about ninjas and y'all know about samurai, right? And so you indulge in Japanese culture, but you don't think, damn, those guys were fighting and killing each other the entire time. The same people, right? Just like if you look at Europe, you got World War I, World War II. You got, and they advertise their Vikings, and they advertise how they used to raid Britain. And y'all watch the shit on Netflix, and y'all don't think, damn, those are the same people killing each other, right? And they also enslaved each other, but they weren't the same people. These Europeans were different tribes, different nations fighting each other in Europe. As currently right now, there are different nations of Europeans, even though racially the same, ethnically they are different, and they don't view each other the same, and they're currently genociding each other right now in Europe for all to see. That's happening, all right? In Africa, the same thing. Different nations who were warring with each other were killing each other for various different political reasons, and that's how some of us ended up over here, because Europeans took advantage of our indentured servitude system that we had, right, after capturing prisoners of war or after capturing criminals. They basically just, hey, let me get, you got $100, let me get $5 off that, right? We African Americans are a result of different African nations fighting each other. Every African American, every Caribbean, every Afro-Latino, within your DNA, within your lineage, you have both sides in many different nations that enslaved each other, that fought each other, that killed each other, that captured each other, right, in order to seek revenge upon each other from a previous grievance. African Americans are a manifestation of West and Central Africans' historical problems, and we're also a manifestation of Pan-Africanism. All right. So if you are an African American, your ancestors both consist of people who captured other people in war, sold them to the European, and people who also got captured and sold to the Europeans. Therefore, if you're going to be mad at anybody, be mad at your goddamn ancestors, because they're the ones who did it to themselves. That's what you need to understand. So stop looking at Africa and holding West Africa to a standard that you don't hold the rest of the goddamn world to when it comes to fighting. So no, you don't have the right to sit there and be mad at all of West Africa because we are over here. Because that means you need to be mad at yourself, because your bloodline consists of both the enslaver and the enslaved. All right. So be mad at yourself. All right. That's the truth. Now, in order to correct all of that, we need reparations. The people who captured us, the real criminals here, are the Dutch, are the French, are the Spanish, are the Portuguese. Those are the countries that enslaved us. All right. Now, for every one or two chiefs, all right, or one or two kings that participated in this, not knowing what they were sending people into, right, which I did a video on how African slavery worked. And if you understood how African slavery worked, you will understand that we had no idea what we were sending these ops into. And when we found out, it was over. Now, another example of how the West works. If you notice right now, the West is trying to, via Soup America, the ultimate form of Western white supremacy, is currently right now trying to force Iran to capitulate to what America wants. And what does America do because it has overwhelming dominant military power? It bombs and kills and maims. They don't mind killing girls in schools. They don't mind murdering innocent people. They don't mind doing all that to stop Iran from being able to use nuclear power to develop their country. And they'll keep lying and saying that Iran wants a nuclear bomb. They'll just say it out loud because they need to say something in the air to justify why they're being international bullies and why they're killing innocent Iranians, right, and disturbing their nations and sovereignty in order to benefit themselves economically, right? Now, in the future, you may say, why did the Iranians sell out their Iranians, and why did they give up their nuclear material where they can have nuclear power and give 24-hour power and development to their communities? Why did they give up that to the white man? Well, when you got 500-pound, 1,000-pound, 5,000-pound bombs being dropped on you, when you have tons of munitions being bombed on you, when you're negotiating, where the person negotiating you is negotiating you with a gun in your face, you got to capitulate or die, right? Or fight and die. Now, for every African chief and king that fought, there were more African kings and chiefs that fought against those European countries that were enslaving us. So if you're going to be upset about a few African kings or chiefs that enslaved us, you need to also be proud about those African chiefs and kings that fought against those Europeans trying to enslave us. Therefore, you need to be balanced in your historical analysis about what happened. That's just what it is. And for all you pretendians that think going that route is going to be safer for you, the European came to America, right? And they exploited the fact that the Native Americans were different tribes, different nations who were fighting each other just like everybody else on the planet, right? and the European came and did the same thing they do to everybody else during that time period. They exploited the differences between the different groups of Native Americans, right? Let them kill each other, gave them guns where war became even more deadly, right? If you want to equate that to something, remember when everybody in America was smoking weed? Remember when the United States introduced cracking and cocaine into the black community, and what did that do? That was biological warfare. Did they not introduce guns into our communities? We stopped fighting, we started shooting. That was warfare. So everything that the United States government does to African Americans domestically to mess up our communities is what they did on that is their foreign policy towards African nations, Asian nations, and Native American nations via Central and South America. All right, give guns and drugs, destabilize, take advantage of historical differences between different people groups, make them weak, let them fight, let them break up, and when they become weak and they can't fight and their population is lessened because of war, then they go in and steal the resources. That's what they do. If you want to know what they did to Africa, then look at what they did to the black community when they go to war with us. Okay, now back to reparations. So because it was an international effort to steal us, as literally Europe they formed a union, right? And they paused their fighting just for a minute, all right, in order to enslave us, right, and carve Africa up. Africa itself has to form a union in order to seek reparations from the international community. Now, every African country knows that nobody's going to cut a check because we're the ones who produced the money, right, to where they would say, here you go, right? Everybody's fully aware that white people in history have never, ever, ever given back, right, any money that they stole, right? But if you not notice, a lot of European countries have started to capitulate and give back a lot of the things that they have stole as far as artifacts and things like that in their museums. Because tables are turning and Africa is becoming more and more and more powerful. But just like America has an original sin, UN has an original sin. The original sin is all of Europe and the Western world was created, their white Wakanda, off the backs of African people, right? So the reason why an African American can't go to the United States government and demand reparations is because the United States government does not recognize African Americans as anything but an equal citizen under the law, when equated with Europeans and everything else. So if you are an American can't technically sue or get anything from the government, because they're looking at all us legally the same, even though that's not practiced in real life, right? And plus, as much power as we have economically within the country of America, we don't have a big enough governing body to force America to do it. If you not pay attention, right? America said no. We're not even going to recognize it. Why? Because if they were to recognize, and I mean, of course, you got Donald Trump. We got a racist neo-Nazi administration. They were not going to recognize it, right? The only way we're going to get the United States government to recognize it is if we have a progressive government, meaning the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, right? The progressive wing of not the liberal party part of the Democratic Party, not the conservative or the central or the corporate part of the Democratic Party, but the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, who for some reason never ever gets elected. Like if Bernie Sanders was the president of the United States, he would have said yes. That's why they don't let people like Bernie Sanders in the White House. All right, that's the truth. You got to understand what's happening in politics. All right, who else said no? Europe said no. Right? Some of the European countries said no. Not all of them, but some of the European countries said no because that means they have to pay up. Okay. And some other countries abstained because America forced them to abstain. Because it said, if you fucking agree with this shit, Japan, if you agree with this shit, Afghanistan, we're going to fuck you up. Right? That's what happens on an international scale. Right? So they have to abstain. That means they probably agree, but they can't participate in the vote because they're being bullied on the international scale by America. Just like how everybody around the world agrees that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians, right? And even though they try to pass legislation on an international scale, it only takes America to veto it. Why? Because America has all the power. So even the UN, it really just consists of America and friends, right? And it's not really a fair governing body. It's just America bullying the rest of Europe, right? But Europe, at the same time, is trying to pivot because they can read the tea leaves and they see Africa rising and it's unstoppable. And because they have the wars happening in Ukraine and Russia, their energy supply is being stopped, is being limited, right? Who has the energy now? Africa. Now, America has effed it up for them in the Middle East, right? Their energy, right? So now they can't get energy from Russia. They can't get energy from goddamn Iran in the Middle East. So who's the only game on the block? Africa, right? So that means if Europe wants to power themselves, if Europe still needs to continue to get the resources they've been stealing for the last freaking 100 years, they got to change their relationship with Africa because African countries are now gaining leverage. And the more and more they gain leverage, the more they're going to continue to introduce legislation to declare that the transatlantic slave trade is a crime against humanity, right? First, it has to be acknowledged before anything can be done. The reason why nothing has been done because it's never been acknowledged on official government in an official government way, right? Now, I hear a lot of people, say, it's like they can't get over the fact that, yes, there were Africans who participated in transatlantic slave trade, willingly and unwillingly, for various amount of time. You're talking about 500 years. I mean, that's a lot. That's a long time, right? You're talking about a lot of different groups of people, a lot of different rulers, a lot of different other, governments on both sides, right? So, but at the same time, those Africans have already did step one. They've already apologized to the African diaspora for their participation in transatlantic slave trade. They've already apologized. Listen, you hear me? African countries, all of them, the African Union, the Pan-African Parliament, individual African countries, individual families within these African countries, individual tribes, individual nations collectively throughout Africa have already apologized to the African Americans specifically and Afro-Caribbean specifically about their portion of the transatlantic slave trade, even to the point to where they flew to every one of these countries and there were ceremonies had where heads of state, right, or heads of kingdoms apologized, apologized profusely to us for their portion in the transatlantic slave trade. So that portion has already been done. America still hasn't apologized. Dutch, the French, and England still hasn't apologized. So we've already gotten an apology from Africa already. So now you move on. After apologies, you do something about it. African countries are already, through their governments, have started to create programs inviting African Americans back home, right, after apologizing and facilitating their ability to live there, whether it's legal citizenship, whether it's land, whether it's right of residency. Most West and Central African countries, in their own way, via legislation, has facilitated African Americans' ability to move to these African countries, including East Africa and South Africa, right, and to make up for historical wrongs. That's why so many African Americans are moving to Africa. If you have not noticed, as they integrate their people back into the continent, they saying come home. So they apologized. They said come home, right? And now within all of their governmental bodies, they are collectively trying to get Europeans to admit what they did. Europeans still don't want to admit what they did. That's okay. That's fine. We knew that was going to happen. But now it's on the record who said no, who said yes, right? This is a historical event. The Ghanaian president is right now the head of the African Union. Therefore, it's his responsibility on behalf of all global black people. This is a Pan-African thing to demand reparations at the United Nations, right? That you recognize it. But once, like I said, once it's recognized, they got to do something about it. Currently, right now, Europeans are going through an existential problem. They have wars on their eastern front, which is destroying their resources. They have population issues, right, which is destroying their countries and economies, right? That's why they are flooding their countries with immigrants from Africa and Asia, while at the same time pretending like they got an immigration problem. Because immigrants, people, when they work, they create revenue and tax revenue, right? That tax revenue goes to the federal government, and then the federal government can operate via that money they get from the citizenship. right? That's how they operate the UN. That's how they operate their militaries. That's how they maintain their technology. If they don't have people, they cannot finance all of these things, and things start to go to hell in the handbag. Then they can't afford anything. Then they'll be poor, right? Europeans are facing destruction, their economic destruction and population destruction. Economic destruction will come before population destruction. Therefore, that's why Europe is changing so rapidly, because all these countries know they need people in their countries to operate systems that require their countries to continue to have the same living standards that they have. While at the same time, Africa, which has an abundance of people, the only place on the planet that has an abundance of people, they're having a problem with facilitating all of the people that they now currently have to have, right? Which is a good problem to have, right? Right? So they are fixing their governments in order to facilitate all the new influx of human beings that are going to have to populate the rest of the world, including the rest of Africa, because there's so much space, so much resources. They realize they don't need anything from anybody else. All they need to do is fix their house. Once the house is fixed, Africa becomes the biggest superpower the world has ever seen, and they will never go back the other way. This is when the tables turn this time, that's it. That's why I be telling y'all, I said, we are the future. Africa's the future. There's nothing that can stop it. Now, a lot of us would like to see things happen instantly, but the world never worked that way, right? The world doesn't. It takes a long time. You're talking about several different government systems from the top all the way down. Everybody has to agree on certain things in order to get things passed. As you can see how long it takes for democracies to operate, right? You see how long it takes for anything to get passed in America, right? Now, keep in mind, reparations, we're talking about more than $20 trillion. Trillion. Do you know what that would do to America if they had to pay up that much money to the African American? That's just the African Americans, right? That's just African Americans, right? Britain would have to pay, and that's just, we are owed by the American government, the British government, the French government, the Spanish, all those European countries owe African Americans money. All those European countries owe Jamaicans and Haitians and Trinidadians and Ghanaians and Brazilians money. All of them owe us money. All of them owe us reparations. You forget what a white American is. A white American are various different Europeans who decided to stay here and call themselves white. Before they called themselves white, they were French, German, right? Portuguese, Spanish. You got to remember that. Right? That's why names are important. Okay. So when you're talking about reparations, we're talking about global repair, right? Global repair. Now, how are the Europeans who find themselves in a situation in which their population has an irreversible decline, meaning there's no possible way for them to reverse their extinction? It's not going to happen. There's no way for them to reverse their extinction. And this is due to their own capitalistic policies, by the way. It's their fault. We didn't do it, right? That means their countries are slowly dying. They're going extinct. And you're telling me, and they got wars that could possibly spread throughout Europe. Because if Russia defeats Ukraine, it's only a matter of time before they go to France, before they go to England, before they hit Germany. So they're dealing with some serious shit, right, in Europe. Because Russia wants some get back, right? They want the Soviet Union back, all right? And they're going to keep going. Because they're tired of them Anglo-Saxon barbarians continue to disrupt what they got going on in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, right? So with all the chaos happening in Europe, do you think at this moment in time that they're going to give African people who they refuse to apologize to trillions of dollars? Like, let's be realistic. Do you think they're going to give up the last bit of money that they have that they stole? They're going to give it all back. They might as well just put their hands up and just give up all semblance of power, because they would have none. They would have none instantly. So because of that, we know they're not going to do it. But it doesn't mean we don't continue to fight for that legislation, because eventually when the tables turn and it tilts to a certain, at some time before 2064, before 2064, the tables are going to turn to the point that we Europeans have no choice. So right now you're seeing a lot of governments in Africa, because I know you see it on the news, right? But you guys, y'all can't put two and two together. So you think that Europe is recolonizing Africa. No, what's happening is Europe has to come with new deals that make sense for Africans now, right? Because of European meddling, they created these savage barbarian terrorists, right? And now they're bothering West Africans and trying to destabilize their countries, right? Because of the war in Libya. right? They have created all these damn ISIS and Taliban who are running around in the desert and shit, freaking disrupting civilization because they want to live back in the goddamn 700s and shit because they're anti-intellectual. So what African countries are saying, they're saying, hey, you know, remember when I ordered those goddamn jets and them goddamn bombs and them goddamn missiles and that goddamn radar technology and them goddamn, remember when I ordered them shits 10 years ago and you still ain't delivered, but you got my money? Yeah, come up off that shit. Matter of fact, nah, I want the new shit now, right? If you want this gold that used to come steal, yeah. If you want some of this gold, first of all, you're not getting it raw. I'm going to refine it, block it up, break it up, and then you can buy it at retail price. If you want that, right, you're going to give me that new technology. I want that shit you got. I want that shit you got so I can secure my country the same way you secure your country. So now European countries who would never give up advanced military technology to African countries. Why would you arm the people you're stealing from? But now they're being forced, right, through new deals to arm the countries that they used to colonize with the latest and greatest technology so that Africans can come, be up to date, like everybody else. Now, what's going to happen is once the Europeans give up this technology to these Western Central African countries, right, these Western Central African countries and their engineers are going to reverse engineer all this shit and they're going to start producing their own shit, right? And then before you know it, they're not going to need none of this shit from the West. And that's just how it works. Despite Africa rising, you still got to do business together. For example, America and China are supposed to be enemies, right? Because white people say so, right? But they are one of our biggest business partners. We literally would go to war while our corporations continue to do business, right? So politics and business is more complicated than the simple-mindedness of, oh, you're my enemy, let me cut you off. The world is much smaller than you think, right? The world is getting smaller and people are getting closer. So there's no such thing as cutting yourself off from the world. If you want to cut yourself off from the world, look at North Korea. And you see how they're handling it, North Korea. Look how dilapidated and undeveloped North Korea is because they decided to cut themselves off from their enemies. Yeah, Africa's not going to do that. We're going to do business, but it has to be square business, right? Now, are all African countries doing square business the way they should? Not every single one of them. Some are still putting shit in their pocket. But as you can see, Donald Trump put billions of dollars in his pocket since he's been the president, which he should have never been the president in the first place. But that's due to the political illiteracy of America, right? Which is cultivated in our schools on purpose, right? They want us to be stupid, right? Because stupid people are great weapons. All the Taliban, all terrorists are idiots. You give an idiot a gun, tell them God said go kill that person, they go do it, right? Whether they're Christian or Muslim, right? Or Jew, right? Here, God said go kill that person. You're right, they're wrong. You'll go to heaven, they'll go to hell. Boom, right? That's Abrahamic religion for you, right? So if you are sitting here thinking that Ghana is stealing something, that's because the people that's telling you that don't know what they're talking about. They're not steeped in international politics. They don't pay attention to what Pan-Africanism is doing because Pan-Africanism is not Umar Johnson. Umar Johnson is not Pan-African. He may be a Pan-African, even though, perceivably right now he's scamming, right? But he's very intelligent. We know he's not stupid. It's just that he might have bit off more than he can chew with this school, right? That's what I think that's what it is. I think he just bit off more than he can chew with this school, and he didn't get as much support as he wanted to because of, his rhetoric and how he moves about. He's not good at it, at doing shit. He's good at talking, but he's not good at business. And I think that's really the problem, right? I don't really think he's scamming. I mean, he's paying his bills. All right. Umar Johnson's a nigga on the street. All right. That's his problem. All right. He got issues. All right. But Umar Johnson is not the end all be all of Pan-Africanism. That's why, if you notice, FBA, when they reference Pan-Africanism, they reference Umar Johnson as if he's some sort of leader of Pan-Africanism, as if he's equivalent to Tariq Nasheed being the leader of FBA. No. The difference, because Pan-Africanism is being led by the president of Ghana at the moment. That's the leader of Pan-Africanism. The prince of Pan-Africanism is freaking Ibrahim Traoré, the warrior. All right, that's the prince. If there's going to be a prince of Pan-Africanism, that's the prince of Pan-Africanism. And another thing, if you think Nigeria and ECOWAS is going to go to war with the AES, you're sadly mistaken. Now, there's political play happening right now. So in front of the European people, because Europe wanted ECOWAS to go to war with the AES. Of course, they want African nations to go to war and destabilize each other. But that's not going to happen. You see, they will say, yeah, sure, we'll do this, we'll do that. But behind closed doors, Nigeria, the West African ECOWAS countries, and the AES are coordinating because they're fighting the same Arab enemy and they're fighting the same colonizer. They're doing it in different ways, and they also got to deal with their own internal politics. But I want all of you guys to feel comfortable in knowing that despite what you see happening on the outside that's been displayed on the news, ECOWAS, the African nations that are in that bloc, and the AES are coordinating behind doors to make sure they don't destabilize each other by going to having unnecessary wars when they both have a common enemy, which is those Arabized Africans and those Arabs in the desert trying to destabilize West African countries, and those European colonizers that fund those Arabs in the goddamn West. Now, when it comes to that, America and France have always been opposed to each other in Africa, right? America's strategic stance is we're going to still not recognize this slavery thing because we can't afford to, right? But at the same time, America recognizes it needs to change its relationship with Africa in order to facilitate their future, right? Right now, that's being kind of somewhat paused or slowed down by having a neo-Nazi administration that is not qualified to be in any of the positions that they're in. That is the truth. But at the same time, there are a few people who recognize that foreign policy says we cannot be adversarial to West Africa as we need West Africa for our own purposes. But keep in mind, you got to maintain these sophisticated pieces of equipment that we have to dominate the world, to run these Navy ships, right? To operate these giant planes, to create the F-35s and shit like that. And who has all of that? Africa, right? And all Africa got to do is raise the price or deny them the ability to purchase it. It's that goddamn simple, and you crush. If you're not noticed, Iran has been able to technically defeat America despite getting destroyed militarily by simply making it difficult for commerce to pass between the Straits of Hormuz. So there are different ways to win war, and it don't always acquire a weapon. If you can control your resources and access to resources, you can defeat a giant because that giant still need those resources to eat. All right. And plus, from Nigeria to Morocco, the oil corridor, right, the pipeline that's been built so that Europe can suck oil off the teat of Africa is being developed and built right now. And the people that's stopping that are the Islamic terrorists that's in the desert right now, currently in that geographical location causing havoc. That means it behooves Europeans who no longer have access to Russia's oil, and they won't have it for the foreseeable future, right? Because of that, they need another access to oil because they have to heat their place. You see, it get cold there. They got a winter, right? So it behooves Europe to now pivot their foreign policy to facilitate West Africa and securing those African countries and helping them stop those dumbass Arabs in the goddamn desert from destabilizing the area because they need this shit, right? They need it. Therefore, that's why we get African countries are getting new technology and drones to be able to do combined arms to attack these bastards in sandals and shit with AK-47s riding around in pickup trucks and shit, causing havoc on the edge of most of these African countries where people are where it's very rural, very, very, very on the outskirts of these areas, right? So that's what you're seeing. That's why America sent their special forces and Marines into Nigeria, and that's why we're using Predator drones to fight these Arabs for real this time, like for real this time, because America also would like to have access to that. You got the Dangote Group, right, who now has the biggest refinery in the world, and they're starting to deliver oil to African countries, something that's never happened before. That means these African countries are now going to have access to energy and power and oil to make and produce things without having to be susceptible to Europeans. They don't have to get shit from Europe. They don't have to get shit from the Middle East. Understand, African economies are slowly but surely empowering themselves, but it's not even slow. This shit's happening very fast, right? It's within our life. It's happening within a single person's lifetime. Africa is jumping leaps and bounds, right? This has never been seen in human history of any group. Like, I'm talking, we ain't supposed to be seeing this shit, right? But you know what? You know who helped facilitate this? Donald Trump. Because white supremacy, that's why I said white supremacy ain't working. White supremacy is so stupid. They put the dumbest person in office who ignored Africa, for almost 10 years. For 10 years, the mighty America has not been able to establish its is foreign policy in Africa, because you've had a president, and then we had an intermittent old president, Biden, who just wasn't all there, right? And then we put Trump back in. We have a government that wasn't good enough to be able to keep Africa in control. That gave Africa and heads of state the ability to get them shits together, because you didn't have as many spies. You didn't have as many NGOs coming in bribing politicians. You didn't have that. So Africa has had the ability to breathe. Also, you got to understand, these old puppets are getting old. They're retiring from politics. And the people that's taking charge now are the people who are the victims of the puppet empires, right? They understand what it's like to be oppressed by a government, and they want to change it. Everybody now can look online and see what a good life looks like. And now that everybody can go on their phone and see what a good government looks like, they want one too, right? People didn't understand corruption. Just like we got politically illiterate people in America, and we are the most politically active and literate comparatively around the world of most people, right? But even us, we were dumb enough to put in Donald Trump. So what do you think what happens to countries that were not really politically aware? When a rich guy will come to your village, give you a whole bunch of rice and bags and say, vote for me. Well, shit, okay, I'm going to vote for you. The man came and gave me a big ass bag of rice, not knowing the implications of voting for that individual. But now that people have cell phones, and now that people are connected, right? Once you connect the nodes, once you connect the brain cells, just think about the world like a big ass brain cell. Brain cells are connecting. People are starting to figure shit out. The puzzles are being put together. Now people are demanding, right? They're demanding transparency. They're demanding equity. They're demanding tangibles, right? So ultimately, that means the government has a lot of pressure to actually do what the hell they're supposed to do, because people are not taking it anymore, right? So you got to understand, we are a part of Africa. We are the Africans outside of Africa, all right? And the reparations for all of us. And I know your favorite FBA content creator, the weirdest ones will say you're not even African. You can't both not be African and been in America, right, before the transatlantic slave trade, and be asking for reparations, because you can't have both. You're not both. Just think about that. How is it that you're not an African at the same time as one of reparations that's supposed to go to Africans? How? All right, because that's what the reparations are for Africans. The whole thing was from Africa to here. Native Americans, they're not getting reparations. That's not their thing. They had treaties, and all them shits was broke. All right, not reparations. Africans, reparations. If you are some sort of pretendian African group that been here for thousands of years, whatever, you're not getting reparations. That's not for you. It's for those. It's for us, Africans. All right. So I hope, you guys understand. Stop listening. If they're a content creator and they call themselves FBA, when it comes to international things, when it comes to they don't know what they're talking about. They don't. They really don't. And they're miseducating you and have you walking around with your chest out, not knowing what you're talking about. That's why we had idiots in New York protesting the Pan-African president that's trying to get us reparations without protesting the UN or going to the White House and protesting the government that said, no, you don't get reparations. The same political party that they put in power because they said the Democrats wouldn't give them reparations, well, they were just told by the Republican Party, the right-wing neo-Nazi racist party, that no, we're not even going to recognize that it should even happen. All right. So you gotta, I don't blame everybody for not knowing this shit, because people are just living their lives. They're just trying to survive. You go to work, you work 18, 10, 12 hours a day. You got 2 days off. You're just trying to have a good time and decompress so you can go back and do that shit again. When you're in survival mode, it's hard to know all this shit, right? Unless you into this shit. And who's really into this shit? It's exhausting. Politics is exhausting. The process of politics is exhausting, right? So, I understand that, but that is what happened. All right. So don't listen to any FBA content. They don't know what they're talking about. They're lying to you, and they're making you think about things that go against what it is that you truly want. If you want reparations, if you truly, truly want reparations, you need to be over here on the Pan-African side, because we are the only ones seeking reparations. Your leader is not seeking reparations. You don't see him speaking in the House of Congress. You don't see him protesting on Washington, D.C. You don't see him talking about legislation. You don't see any FBA doing anything politically. You don't. All you see, and you got to be honest, is Tariq Nasheed talking shit on the internet with a bad African accent and getting paid for it. All you see is Tariq Nasheed and all the lackeys. Alpha Male Network is an idiot. He's the biggest Red Bull drinking idiot. You need to stop drinking them Red Bull and stop drinking coffee so much because his heart going to pop. As much, he's like the FBI hype man and shit. He's going to be in Hidden Colors. You gave Tariq Nasheed $165 to go, $165,000 so you can listen to Alpha Male Network and go like this. I think they calmed him down a little bit. He kind of talking. They got him to sit down in like 5 minutes to just say something. Some irrelevant bullshit that you already know. While Pan-Africans are doing the real work. While Pan-African organizations and government and heads of state are doing the real work, talking truth to power, right? Standing up for Africans globally, right? And you got to understand the difference. One is pretending and one is for real. FBA is for pretend. It's meant to deunify. Is a psyop by white supremacy. I've already proven it. Many Africans have already proven it. Many African Americans have already proven it. It's just up to you, once you know, to do something about it. All right. Anyway, I hope this has been informative. Tell me what you guys think in the comment section. It's Afro Think Tank. Learn something, teach something. I'm out.
Miscellaneous fact of the day. Africa has 5 regions: North, South, Central, East, and West. But did you know they created a 6th region? As part of the African Union, the 6th region is for us in the diaspora. Yeah, every leader of every African country got together to make room for us. That means you can get dual citizenship in any country in Africa. It's kind of like the Jewish birthright. Any Jew across the world can go home to Israel for their birthright. So we've all been invited to come home and become voting members of the African Union. That's for all of us.
And in fact, let me tell you something. Pan-Africanism is the only movement that has ever threatened our oppressors. And you're looking at a reality in time in history where Pan-Europeanism, Pan-Arabism, and Pan-Asianism is flourishing. White folks go to Europe and make these international agreements. NATO is Pan-Europeanism. The World Bank and the IMF is Pan-Europeanism. But you're going to fight.
So it's 1919, and 57 black leaders from 15 nations pull up in Paris. Their purpose was to carve out a path to self-rule in Africa. So who's all there? First of all, Europe stopped most African dignitaries from flying in. And America was just as bad. Our chief colonial officer, yeah, that was a job, said he didn't believe black people could govern themselves. He sounded like the governor of New York.
Young black kids growing up in the Bronx who don't even know what the word a computer is. They don't know.
America even denied a passport to Madam C.J. Walker. You wasn't gonna do nothing but take other people's hair product ideas. Despite all of this, Haiti, Liberia, Congo, Martinique, Ethiopia, Egypt, and many others, including a lot of black folk from the U.S. and Europe, they all showed up for the first Pan-African Congress. But there was just one main problem. Most of these black intellectuals were tied up with the colonial powers they were trying to oppose. Blaise Dane made the first speech. He was Senegalese, but he was coming out of France. And he said blacks coming out of Europe and America were more civilized than backward Africans. How you gonna come out the gate like that? He believed Europe needed to get out of Africa not because colonialism was bad, but because Europeans were bad at governance. Then the French Caribbean spoke. They said they'd rather deal with a benevolent colonizer who could improve people's lives now than wage another revolution. Liberia said we should be free, but they didn't want to bite the hand that fed them, so they avoided criticizing the U.S. publicly. Long story short, they were petitioning their colonizers to free them. And y'all know that don't work. They wrote up a whole resolution that said they wanted the League of Nations to establish international protections for Native Africans. The League of Nations turned around and said the Pan-African Congress had no legal status to any government around the world, and therefore could not even be in the room. Sorry if y'all thought today was going to be a good story. Whatever the good intentions, these black intellectuals, these leaders, they were really centralizing their own status amongst colonial powers, rather than really pushing for African independence. But when the world saw the resolution, black folks started talking, and they started organizing. No matter how flawed it once was, they took the Pan-African Congress and made it more militant every convening. More militant meant more aggressively demanding independence. It meant focusing on workers rather than bourgeois society. It meant women were in positions of leadership and had a greater space to voice their opinions. And it meant there were a whole lot more Garveyites in the room. By 1945, the Pan-African Congress was readily preparing for revolution and African independence.
Africans have been around a long time before Afrocentricity. We said the first Pan-African conference was in 1900. Just because we've not achieved Pan-Africans today doesn't mean it's not achievable. That sounds like maybe you've got some confusion with the American capitalist system of everything is instant. You know, instant coffee, instant this, instant replay. But freedom is not instant. It is an eternal struggle. Therefore, from 1900... Therefore, from 1900 up until now, and I began by showing you that it started when we were first interrupted. Do you think that the Africans who were put into slavery were not fighting for Africa? They didn't fight, they waited until Afrocentricity? No. The struggle continues. Afrocentricity is only a term. It doesn't give the content of the struggle. The struggle is always there. There's a scientific law. Wherever there's oppression, there is resistance. Even if you cannot detect it with the naked eye, there is resistance.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
'Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! We most definitely cannot forget about the people of Sudan!
Thanks for watching Afro Think Tank. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Substack and Patreon for more content. Remember, it's Pan-Africanism or nothing.